On today's episode of Locked On Wild, is the Parise and Suter dead cap money already spent?
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Ultimate Hockey GM. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NHL GM and managing your hockey franchise? Now you can with Ultimate Hockey GM. It is completely free, and Locked On listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in the game store. To download the game, just visit hockeygm.app or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate Hockey GM, start your dynasty today. Side note, Locked On Wild is going to start theirs next week. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we discuss the rumors that Jacob Middleton could be in line for a extension similar to the extensions that were handed out before last season. We'll talk about where that factors in, and is there any money left from the Parise and Suter dead cap hits with all the extensions that have been handed out, with Brock Faber's extension, with, if he is still on the roster, Marco Rossi's extension yet to all be inked. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. We will have another episode coming for you this evening with Isha Jerome. Not going to lie, I was getting all ready to get that one posted, and a listener tipped me off to a nugget from the latest Worst Seats in the House podcast. Michael Russo discussing the potential for Jake Middleton to get a 4-year, $4 million per extension, somewhere in that range. And it got me thinking, because number one, what is it with the 4-year extensions? Number two, what is it with $4 million per? And number three, what? So there are a lot of layers to peel back from this. Number one, Jake Middleton is a fine player. It's not a slight on him, but $4 million per on a 4-year contract that is likely going to have trade protections too. This is just becoming very quickly the Bill Guerin special. And many of you that listen to this show on a daily basis have been pointing this out forever. And it's not that I chose to ignore it or anything along those lines, but we just continue to see the same thing over and over. These deals by themselves largely are fine by themselves, but it's just another step in the direction of locking in a roster that is not just one or two players away. It just isn't. And you really have to start asking yourself the question of, where do these players fit on a legitimate cup contender? I don't really care about market value. Russo pointed out that the likely free agent AAV for Middleton, if he was looking elsewhere, Evolving Hockey saying he would be getting somewhere around $4.5 million a year. I get it. I understand that the market value goes up. I understand the salary cap goes up. I understand all of that. And so, again, the deal by itself, probably fine. If it's me, I'm probably going to 2-year deal. But we just, again, another example of locking in part of a core that has never gotten out of the first round. Part of a core that has had 2 straight postseasons in which they lost 3 straight games after having a 2-1 lead. And it's one thing to it's one thing to be the Tampa Bay Lightning and be just starting your window for cup contention and to win 2 cups in a row and to try to retain as much of that as you can. That's one thing. If you are starting your contention window and you look at your team and you say, hot dog, we are ready to compete. We have won 2 straight Stanley Cups. Let's make it 3. We can do it with this group because we have all the pieces you need. That is not this Minnesota Wild team. This Minnesota Wild team is not 1 or 2 players away because we are at a point with this Minnesota Wild team where the roster, the starting roster is good enough to win you games in the regular season. There's not a ton of depth, and it's starting to seem like a team that has been constructed because all of these pieces gel with Kirill Kaprizov. And not that they are elite pieces themselves. Do you get what do you understand where I'm going with that? Is that these players all look and perform better because you have a Kirill Kaprizov on the roster. Let's take Kirill out of the equation for a second. Do all these guys get these same deals, these same extensions? Because I think it's pretty safe to say Matt Zuccarello's numbers took a dip without Kirill Kaprizov as his line mate last year. I think it's pretty safe to say that Ryan Hartman's production has largely been tied to having Kirill Kaprizov on his line. I think it's pretty safe to say that Kirill Kaprizov giving the Minnesota Wild a lead more often than he didn't allowed Marcus Foligno to play with a little bit more of an edge to his game and going out and trying to hit everything that moves, as opposed to having to try to claw back from a 1 or 2 goal deficit. All of these pieces are fine, sprinkled in on a roster that is making a cup run. But that statement should be an indictment itself. These pieces are all fine. Jake Middleton played a portion of the season last year injured. It's also fair to say that his numbers took a dip without Jared Spurgeon as his defensive partner. It's also fair to say that Freddie Gaudreau got locked into a 5-year deal because he was playing with some pretty good pieces around him. Yes, he was hurt this past season, but when you take those pieces away... And so if I can sit here at my computer and point this out, why does a general manager not get it? Why is the general manager seemingly the only one that is not able to see what we all see? And so this kind of leads me to, again, something a lot of people, especially on the YouTube side, not to say that the audio side hasn't, but the YouTube comment section points this out on almost a daily basis. Like, you got to start asking yourselves, what are we building towards? Because for the last couple of seasons, I think everybody's been under the impression that it was 2025, 2026. And now you look at it, and the Parise and Suter money is basically all spoken for. $4.125 million to Matt Zuccarello, $4 million to Marcus Foligno, $4 million to Ryan Hartman, $2.1 million to Freddie Gaudreau. I'll throw the Jake Middleton extension in there. It has not been inked yet, but if Michael Russo floats it, there is more than just smoke there. So $4 million to Jake Middleton, 16.125, 18.225. Zach Bogosian's extension in there too, another 1.25. That's $19 million right there. Haven't even factored in Brock Faber's extension yet. That's going to be another 9. We go very quickly from it less than a year. Well, actually, it's just about a year. Those extensions to Foligno and Zuccarello and Hartman were all signed, I believe, between July and September. At face value, by themselves, most of these contracts are fine. But here's the other premise of this, and we'll talk about this after the break. You're building this roster with the assumption that you can't find any of these skill sets in the minors or in free agency. Folks, we're building this roster backwards. We'll talk about that and the notion that this team is 1 or 2 pieces away as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Ultimate Hockey GM. Hey, Locked On Wild fans, let's take a minute to bring up one of our partners, the mobile game Ultimate Hockey GM. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NHL GM and managing your hockey franchise? Do you think you could run the Minnesota Wild better than Bill Guerin? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is most definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the seasons, and lead them to glory. Plus, hire the right coaches and staff, trade players or draft picks, navigate through free agency and the draft, all in a challenging and realistic game world. As a Wild fan, you know there is no off-season. GMs are constantly making moves or locking in their full team at every point of the year to improve their team's chances. And that's why I think Wild fans are going to love this game. And for Locked On Wild listeners, you better believe we are going to take a spin through Ultimate Hockey GM and see what happens. Ultimate Hockey GM is completely free and playable online. Play on the go, as you want, and when you want to. By the way, Locked On Network listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in the game store. So make sure to check it out. To download, just visit hockeygm.app or look it up on the app stores. That's Ultimate Hockey GM. Start your dynasty today. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, we've still got our episode with Isha Jerome coming later today. We are going to pick one player from every season of Minnesota Wild hockey and put them together into a lineup. I'll give you a hint. They're different. Isha's roster and mine are very different, and mine is going to be the one that probably draws the most ire. So stay tuned to see how that plays out on a bonus episode coming later today. But right back to the conversation, because we just continue to see, and I threw a bunch of stuff out on Twitter today. And so I want to go through a lot of it. Let's start at the beginning. So we talk about the 4x4, and here are the extensions that have been handed out in the last year. Philip Gustafsson got the $3.375 million for 3-year extension. Marcus Foligno got a 4x4. Matt Zuccarello got a 2 by 4.125. Ryan Hartman got a 3x4. Zach Bogosian got a 2 by 1.25. Marc-Andre Fleury got a 1 by 2.5. And now the rumors that Jake Middleton could get somewhere around a 4 by 4. You got to ask yourself this question. Are the Minnesota Wild 1 or 2 players away from legitimate contention? This would be the reason for locking in as much of this group as they can. And I know the thought before last season, and even the season before that, was to maybe lock these guys in until the buyouts are done, to give you an opportunity to kind of tread water. You're not going to be able to compete with that much constraint in the salary cap. And so cost certainty was the big term that was thrown around to finish off the window of the cap hits. But even that is a fallacy, because here's the notion. Here is the rub. Teams put their core together, they get their core built, and they find what they need to put around it. Now, there are a variety of ways to do that. You can go out in free agency and go grab somebody if you need a bottom six player to add to your mix. You can swing a trade. If you feel like your top six isn't enough, you go out and get somebody to add to that mix. Or you can dip into your prospect pool and add prospects to the mix that could potentially fill skill sets or player profiles that you're missing. And it feels like the Wild are locking in all of the players that should be most easily findable elsewhere. The bottom six guys. Again, I have used this as an example often on this show because it fully illustrates the point that I'm making. The Colorado Avalanche had a gaping hole on their roster on the second line at the center position. They also had some pretty big holes in their bottom six. Guess what they did? They went out at the trade deadline and they addressed both spots. Now, did the Avalanche, did they advance in the playoffs? No. They were ousted by the Winnipeg Jets. So good, nice work. Nice work with that, Colorado. It really got you a whole lot farther. But guess what? Because the Colorado Avalanche have a pretty clearly defined core of players and a pretty legitimate top six, they are going to do the exact same thing. They're going to hit on players that fit what they're building to fill those bottom six roles. The Dallas Stars maybe do this the best of anyone. They drafted, this is the profile that the Wild should be looking to try to emulate. They drafted a bunch of players, Rupe Hintz, Jason Robertson, Jamie Benn, all these players, Wyatt Johnston, all these players have hit. And so what do? Then you build around them and you add pieces from your prospect pool to supplement. Sam Steele signs to play a fourth line role. He had a pretty darn good season. Matt Duchene was bought out. He goes to Dallas on a cheap deal and he has like 25 goals. Like, it feels like the Wilds have made efforts to retain their bottom six and are trying to piece the top six together, which is not that's not a sustainable business model. It's not a sustainable model for success. And I know, hey, they had back-to-back 100-point seasons. This year was a flash in the pan, a lot of injuries. And it's pretty much the same group that had 113 points a couple seasons ago. Well, guess what? They're missing one critical piece from that success, Kevin Fiala, and they are 2 years older. And we have seen that by their sheer play style, a lot of guys on this roster get dinged up. It's not unique to the Minnesota Wild. It's not a unique problem to them. Every team has players that just get banged up during the course of the season, and that's not an indictment. It's not an indictment on any of those guys. But there is nobody at this point that can step in to fill those spots. And you don't have the ability to be able to say, okay, our depth was challenged last year. We need to go out and add more. Where are you going to put them? Where are you going to put them? Because the roster is, as of right now, here are the guys that are under contract for this season. For forwards, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 players under contract right Now, for the forwards, for the defensemen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Jared Spurgeon on injured reserve makes 6. So you have space for a 13th forward and a 7th defenseman. You have Philip Gustafson, Marc-Andre Fleury, and Jesper Wallstedt in your goalie rotation. In order to be able to fit more onto this roster, you're going to have to make some moves. And the players that are most commonly being dangled to potentially do that are a 22-year-old center who just scored 21 goals in his rookie season and a 26-year-old goaltender who is 1 year removed from being 4th in the Vezina voting, basically. Being about the 3rd statistical goalie in the entire NHL. Those are the pieces that you are dangling. Now, if you have depth, if you have a lot of pieces on the board, maybe that's okay. But you're picking to try to trade a 22-year-old over a 36-year-old, a 32-year-old, a 29-year-old, a 31-year-old, a 33-year-old who all have no move protections. What are we building towards? What are we building towards? Well, I'll tell you when we come back, because I'll give you a hint. It's a season that already took place. We'll talk about that to finish today's episode of Locked On Wilds after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. One final segment of today's bonus episode of Locked On Wild. Again, we'll have Isha Jerome's episode where we take a look at one player from each year of Minnesota Wild hockey. We'll throw them together into a roster, see what we come up with for line combinations. It was a fun exercise. I think you're going to enjoy the look back at all the years of futility, I think is a good word, but we got to finish with a couple of things, because this actually, this got me kind of fired up here today. And so I just want to throw a few other things at you for the rest of today's episode. I'm going to use, just because they're in the Stanley Cup final, and so they're the toast of what you would look for in a team. That being the Florida Panthers. I just want to look at their roster and see where particular Minnesota Wild players would slot in. And here's, based off the daily faceoff, here's the roster. Here are the line combinations that Florida has going right now. You got Evan Rodriguez, Alexander Barkov, Sam Reinhart as your top line. Pretty good. Pretty impressive. Pretty formidable. Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Bennett, and Matthew Tkachuk is your second line. I really like that top six. Eetu Luostarinen. I That's definitely not right, but that's what we're going to go with. Anton Lundell and Vladimir Tarasenko is your third line. Steven Lorenz, Kevin Stenlund, and Kyle Okposo is your fourth line. On defense, Gustav Forsling, Aaron Ekblad, Nico Mikkola, Brandon Montour, and Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Dmitry Kulikov as your third pairing. Folks, that's a very good roster. Are there some players on there that you look at and you think, could probably do better there? But that's just the nature of roster construction. Is players come to your roster from a variety of spots. Some players you draft, some players you sign via free agency. Sometimes you take a chance on a guy to see if they can do better in a different setting. But the point that I am trying to get across here, Rodriguez, Barkov, Reinhart, Verhaeghe, Bennett, Tkachuk. Who of the extensions? Who of Matt Zuccarello, Marcus Foligno, Ryan Hartman, Freddie Gaudreau, let's throw Marcus Johansson in there too. Who of that group is supplanting any of those players? Anybody? That's the problem, is that, again, because these players play well with Kirill Kaprizov, it makes them look like more than they are. You take that away, and you see a situation in which like 40 of Matt Zuccarello's points either came on the power play or with Kirill Kaprizov directly. It's all right there. Why can Bill Guerin not see it? And like you just point blank ask yourself, is this a roster that is close considering what we have seen? I just read off the top six. That top six and the Wild's top six certainly has good players in it. Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Boldy, Joel Eriksson Ek, Marco Rossi are good players. That Florida top six would kill this one. I know there are variables that go into a game in, game out situation to where you can pick up a win against a team like Florida in the regular season. But you put the Florida Panthers against the Minnesota Wild as constructed right now, that's a 4-0 series win for the Panthers. Hands down. Edmonton has a lot of top-end talent, and the Panthers are making them look like fools. And so this is not as simple as, are the Wild one or two players away? They're not. They have more needs than that. And the hope would be to be able to give opportunities to young players to see what you have and to then be able to see when the money would have been there to see what you need to go spend it on. And on the defensive side, maybe it does make a little more sense to try to retain these players in the near term until some of these prospects start to gain their footing. But on the forward side, there's no reason Marcus Johansson should be taking up those minutes. That Freddie Gaudreau extension looks like a miscalculation, to say the least. Those spots should be going to players with upside, because it's like any sport. If you are able to get cheaper contracts to hit, then that's more money to spend on other things. And as of right now, for 2025, 2026, let's just look at the numbers. You have projected $35 million in cap space before the Jacob Middleton extension. And got into a nice exchange on Twitter. Joseph Nowariak tweeted out a pretty good indication as to how quickly that money can dry up. That $35 million does not count in a Faber extension. If you use $9 million, that's $26 million. Jacob Middleton, $4 million a year. That's $4 million. That gets you to 22. If you have Marco Rossi around to be able to sign him to an extension, a bridge deal, let's just use 4 as a midpoint there. That's 18 million. And that's with a roster size of 14. You're going to have to also give Jesper a deal here pretty soon. You're going to have to give Jesper a deal next after this season is done. You're going to have to give him an extension. So let's just say 3 just for easy math. That all of a sudden is a roster size of 15, and you have $11 million to fill the rest. And the premise of trading some of these guys away only works if your GM is willing to do it. And I don't get the sense that the GM that's handing out trade protections like bumper stickers is going to be willing to do that. Folks, we're chasing 2021, 2022. We have been chasing this for the last 2 seasons. We've been chasing that high. You got a little taste, all the goals, all the fun comebacks, all of the running people out of the XL Energy Center by just scoring in bunches. We've been chasing that high for 2 years, and here's the problem. You got rid of, now, you didn't just get rid of him. You got a good value in Brock Faber and Liam Ogren in return. So that's not the point that I'm making here. But the point is that Kevin Fiala was a big part of why that offense worked, because you had 2 lines that were capable of scoring at will. You don't have that right now because a lot of these guys have produced because Kirill Kaprizov was able to help them do it. And so every year that we are removed from 2021, 2022, this roster gets a year older. And if you are not in your window of contention, doesn't it make sense to try to build around your next core? I saw a tweet, and I'm going to forever kick myself that I didn't bookmark it because it is so true, and it reigns supreme over any of the analysis I've ever seen. You need everything for your contention window, for your Stanley Cup contention window. You need everything to align for that moment, whether it be 1 season, whether it be 2 seasons. You have to maximize what is on your NHL roster, and you need to use oftentimes what is down the line to help fulfill that. But we're not there. And that's okay to admit. This isn't a team that's going to compete for a Stanley Cup. But what you should be doing is allowing yourself the opportunity to see what comes next, so you can build around that and put yourself in contention for a cup window. So it hasn't been signed yet, but I got to tell you, I don't understand the vision. I don't understand the direction, and it seems like there is a more and more growing sense that a lot of fans are in the same boat. And I have never been kind of on that side of the like, yeah, let's go full bore criticism for how things are going. I really can't fault anybody for being in that sense, because it seems like every one of these deals is being done for something that is not on the table right now. And so you should, I don't know, If it's not 2025, 2026, if it's 2 years beyond that, build for that. Build for that. Give yourself flexibility for that. See what you've got in your farm system. And really hit that as your legitimate contention. But now, even if we go with 2027, 2028, look at who you've got. You got Jonas Brodin for one more season. You've got Freddie Gaudreau in the final year of his deal. Ryan Hartman will just be coming off of his. Marcus Foligno is still on the roster. Like, it seems like every time we put another tendril where it shouldn't. So, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if the number's right. If it's a 4x4, we'll see what happens. But I got to tell you, all these deals by themselves, mostly fine. All of them together, there is no cap hit relief. It's all spent. It's all gone.